Thanks for attending my workshop. My name's Gavin Knapp. I'm going to be walking you through adversarial infrastructure hunting today. Name of the workshop is They Can Run, but They Can't Hide. Hopefully it's going to be a bit of fun. It's going to teach you a few things about tracking infrastructure, some things you can go and apply immediately, either for your own research or as part of your current role. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to opening up the CTF then at the end of it to see how you guys fare. And for those of you that are going to be on the Edinburgh location, I'm also going to be there and looking forward to giving out a couple of challenge coins to people who do well in the CTF. So yeah, let's get cracking with the workshop. So who am I? My name's Gavin Knapp. I'm a Welshman, rugby player, not playing too much these days, unfortunately. The body's finally given up on me. And yeah, I've got my background sort of security consulting, cloud security engineering, security operations, and now threat intelligence. So yeah, sort of just over 12 years in security, and yeah, really sort of passionate. Both from, in terms of what I do in work, but also trying to do as much as I can outside of work. And yeah, my GitHub's there, and also my X if anyone wants to reach out and collaborate on anything. So yeah, our agenda today is quite simple. We're going to do an introduction to the infrastructure tracking process. This is just one you could use. There are many out there. Kudos to sort of Joe Slovic, who came up with some of the principles behind what I use in this process. We're going to track some infrastructure using URL scan, or at least learn how to. And we're going to also look at Shodan and how we can use that to track infrastructure. We're going to touch on some other tools for infrastructure tracking. There's so many out there, particularly these days. There's sort of new tools popping up every couple of months, and there's some really good ones out there. Obviously, I'm favouring URL scan and Shodan because that's pretty much what we use a lot of where I currently work. But again, we do have other tools. We do use other tools, and there's a good saying, all tools lie, right? So you really need to use different approaches and tooling to ensure what you're seeing is representative of what's out there, and you're not sort of introducing gaps in visibility. And yeah, we're going to look at some real world examples of infrastructure tracking, and then we're going to hopefully test our skills in the CDF and do very well. And for those of you in Edinburgh, obviously go away with some coins. Right, so into the infrastructure tracking process. Just touching on some of the principles behind, infrastructure tracking. We've all heard of indicators of compromise. Personally think this is quite a reactive approach to detection and prevention. Still very necessary, but a lot of the times these IOCs may not have context. They can get to us a little late, and there's a sort of a half-life or shelf life on these IOCs to be effective. The more modern approach is looking at indicators of attack or indicators of future attack. Some vendors are coining it. But the premise is this is more proactive. We're looking to identify these indicators early, so either pre-attack or early stages of attack. And the way we're doing it is tracking the infrastructure or the identifying the indicators by looking at behaviors. So we'll touch on that now in the next slide. So malicious infrastructure tracking, like I said, it's a proactive endeavor. It's repeatable, really identifying things, before attacks occur at pre-attack stages. But again, can sort of identify attacks at the command and control or exfiltration stage as well, which is really important. Even if the worst does happen, that you can see that and then, prepare for the worst and respond accordingly. Clustering your findings can uncover hidden infrastructure. So we can start with, one IP, one domain, one hash value or metadata property, and all of a sudden we can identify, a cluster of adversary command and control infrastructure, so it can be very effective, or phishing kits and other things that we didn't know about when we had that individual indicator or information to act on. And it's becoming a critical capability for defenders to track, defend, and basically attribute against adversaries. And really sort of a staple part of kind of modern Defender or CTI analyst toolkit. So definitely something that we should all be learning, improving, and sharing. Detection robustness. So I think, as I mentioned, indicators of compromise really look at the bottom of the pyramid. So they're really more about hashes, IPs, and domain names. These can be quite brittle when we use them for detection. And particularly, attackers can switch these up quite quickly, which can, again, prove challenging then to maintain their effectiveness. What we're looking at here in terms of trying to track infrastructure is really create rules that can identify artifacts at the top of the pyramid. So network host artifacts, tools, and TTPs or behaviors. And, some of these behaviors are repeatable. So whether they have a particular thing they do with certificate values, or perhaps there's hosting providers and other metadata properties that they commonly use. So identifying these can be a really good way of tracking infrastructure and tracking the adversary. And they don't always understand that they have made these OPSEC errors and allow us to do that. So, it's definitely a more research-driven approach, and tracking indicators like this, they can persist and last a lot longer than if we just look at indicators of compromise. So, threat actor disruptions for research, the MITRE ATT&CK framework by there, there's a lot of tactics and even more techniques. The threat actors have plenty of options in terms of, what they can use in their attack chains. And this is, only what we know about, only what's been reported about. MITRE ATT&CK doesn't put new novel techniques that perhaps haven't been identified in a real world attack, even though we know that there's lots of novel attacks and, and tooling that we might not have made its way into this framework. So again, they've got lots of options. What we're trying to do really with what we're teaching you today, and also with infrastructure tracking in general, is try and hit it early in that pre-attack stage, at the resource development or initial access stage, ideally, that we can identify these things and put a stop to it. Worst case, obviously, we can also then leverage it to detect command and control or exfiltration, but ideally we don't want it to get as far as that, but ultimately it does, and you're able to cover off both of these areas, which some of the tools such as EDR may not be the best at doing. Malicious infrastructure pivots, and just going into kind of what we're going to be looking at. So in terms of infrastructure, we're thinking about domains, IP addresses, certificates, and really the metadata properties or hashes or other things that represent those. Those vendors we sort of talked about, tend to collect those artifacts and metadata properties and allow you to search those. And that's what we're going to be doing when we track infrastructure, is really looking at data sets that contain these types of artifacts and properties and doing searches from it. When we look at domain characteristics, IP characteristics, and certificate characteristics, the best detections we can produce are where we can use a combination of them. If we only use one of those characteristics, maybe one metadata property, that could be quite brittle or could be subject to change and false positives. So ideally, the more of these properties that we can use, the more robust our detection can be, and we can track this infrastructure in a higher fidelity way. And again, I mentioned Joe Slovic at the beginning. He sort of came up with a lot of the concepts around how to do this from sort of many sort of years ago. So props to him, and great to see people kind of carrying on his work and making this a really important part of modern cyber defense. So the infrastructure hunting process, and one that we particularly use, it takes it through 5 stages: observe, identify, craft, monitor, and manage. So the observe area, again, is really kind of getting that direction, whether it's from external stakeholders or your team. Once you've got that direction, what we're going after is to categorize it and to collect on it. The identify stage, really, developing those fingerprints or identifying the fingerprints that can be used for detections. Once we get to craft, we're looking to refine, pivot, and cluster our detections. And then once we feel we've got strong, we're looking to validate and document how we've done that. In our monitor stage, we're looking to automate that. So but ideally automating those detections so we continuously track infrastructure. If we can't automate it, then we will have some manual detections or tracks as well that we can run ourselves, until we get enough confidence that can be automated. And the management phase again is really like any kind of detection life cycle, making sure that the checks and balances are in place and we're updating rules when they need to. That's really important. Just quickly walk through some of these. So observe phase again, as I said, identifying intelligence requirements. What is it that we're going after? We don't want to just kind of be shooting at everything, particularly if some of these threat actors and the infrastructure associated with them is not going to, be interested in us or our vertical. We really need to think about which groups are, actually interested in us. What kind of tooling are they using, or what kind of infrastructure they're using? Like China using, operational relay boxes or orb networks. Is that something we need to be wary about and need to look at in terms of tracking, so we can detect on that if there are connections made into our environment, or other ransomware actors might be using things like Cobalt strikes. So again, what are the common kind of patterns that we can identify fingerprints to be able to detect in a commonly used framework that's going to give us sort of best bang for our buck. Once we've done that, we're looking to categorize again. We want to report on our sort of our kind of infrastructure tracking program. We want to prioritize the most important requirements, and again, collection. What data sets do we have available to us? What indicators do we need to go after? That's a really important part of the observe phase. In the identify stage again, so really identifying the fingerprints. Again, we spoke on previous slides about those sort of artifacts or domain, IP and certificate artifacts, and this is really where we are looking into those data sets that represent those to try and identify things that we can use to continuously track. Quite often this will be a value in the certificate, or potentially like a unique HTTP header, or as we said, could be a combination, maybe a SSL JARM value or hash value combined with the header, which ultimately allows us to sort of identify a method for tracking them. Once we've got that together, again, into that craft stage, so refining it, pivoting again to identify additional rules. So we may have one solid rule, but based on what we found from that rule, we might find additional fingerprints that we can start to build out. So often when you go looking for infrastructure, you might start with a header and then maybe a page title. Perhaps there's some certificate values are quite unique, and then again using these to really sort of refine our rules. So we've got as many possibilities available to us to go and detect that infrastructure. Into the monitor phase. So again, as we said, once we've got our automated tracks and our manual tracks set up, it's really kind of having those available and operational. Again, candidate tracks where we don't have confidence in what we've produced. Going to continue to sort of work on these, going to continue to check them over time to see if something happens or we identify something that does give us the confidence where we can actually put that into a manual automated track. And we obviously reject tracks once they're either not producing the results we expect, or maybe just not in a position to be refined to be usable within a SOC. Obviously, it's particularly in an MSSP or somewhere else, you can't push false positive alerts into their queues. It really needs to be at a certain fidelity level where we can trust it and we're happy with it. Otherwise, it just needs to stay as possibly a threat hunting option that would be run less often, maybe just doing it for a retro hunt, which requires more triage. And managed phase again. So we're not kind of really digging into this in this workshop, but it is really important that you've got rule lifecycle management established. As we mentioned, these are kind of not an indefinite thing that's going to work. Each rule needs to be reviewed frequently to ensure that it is detecting what you expect from it. And you need to be quick again in terms of actually rejecting or modifying and improving rules that are not performing or have are not producing the intended results. Finally, we're just going to talk about some resources that can really help in this process, and one of those is the Pivot Atlas. So a fantastic project by Amitai Cohen. he really sort of did all the documentation for myself and my team, where we were sort of looking at kind of building out some more robust documentation. This guy came along and really sort of did a job for everyone. So I really recommend you go and look at that. He's put a lot of time and effort in, and it's a brilliant resource identifying exactly all of the different kind of things that you could identify to look for and pivot off for infrastructure. So yeah, it's a brilliant website, and yeah, his Twitter as well is definitely worth a look at. I'm just going to bring up the Pivot Atlas quickly so you can actually have a look at that in the flash. Let me just bring that one up for you. And as you can see, really nice sort of website. The About section kind of taking you into the basics, and lots of these sort of mermaid diagrams again to sort of break everything down. It really is quite easy to follow. So again, if you start with a TLS certificate, we can get to a domain, or we can get from a domain, then we'll get to other domains, via the metadata properties. It lists all the artifacts again. So I've got these artifact breakdowns for whether it's a sort of a domain, and a map for that, or an IP address. Again, what you can do with IP addresses and TLS certificates is something we're definitely going to sort of be using, in the workshop. So again, looking at different things, whether they're properties or hash algorithms and hashes that have been established for, again, looking for patterns within certificate data sets. Again, from malware samples, where you can get to again, all of the different types of fingerprints, which again we'll be using some of these. So definitely using sort of JARM fingerprints from certificates, HTML content hashes, HTTP header hashes. All of these are things you're going to sort of use in the workshop. And yeah, just a fantastic website again. That he's got a really good tool section as well. Some of the stuff you can use to go doing pivoting. But yeah, check it out in your own time. Really good resource. Definitely one to bookmark. And just finally, I think we just move on. Yeah, so there's one of the sort of mind map or mermaid diagrams again that I find really useful to look at, particularly sometimes when I'm sort of just thinking like, what else can I look for on this host? If there's something that's not quite obvious to create that detection or create that hunt rule, is there something I've missed? So yeah, really good reference material. So let's get cracking, hunting some infrastructure with urlscan.io. So first we're just going to learn how to use the tool, a couple of simple examples, and then we'll get into some more involved examples. Again, there's nothing too difficult here. Anyone can use this tool. I think if you've got access to the premium version, then it becomes a lot easier. The UI just helps you hunt more easily, and whereas you have to sort of trawl through different views when you're using the freemium version, but it still works really well, and absolutely no need to sort of pay money out. You can use the free version to good effect. So yeah, again, it's a free service that's used to scan and analyze URLs. So typically these are just sites that have been submitted to it. What it captures, you've got domains, IPs, you've got a lot of the file and content that's actually on a page or on a website. The DOM contents there as well. It's limited to a certain number of bytes, but there's still content there you can search through. You see all the network requests to and from the site. And yeah, as we mentioned, there are sort of verdicts as well with the more premium version of URLscan that you can use. Essentially, though, a lot of that data is searchable, both kind of using various field names, but also via regex searching, some wildcard searching as well. So it's using Elastic in the back end. If you're familiar with Elastic, you're really going to get on with being able to search URLscan. It often takes, a field value kind of search format. So, and, typical Boolean logic to combine your query operators. In terms of searching the names, the field names, they are case sensitive. Yeah, so at the beginning it can take a little bit of getting used to. You can't really break it if you get things wrong. Then there is a good help page on there, but also ChatGPT, right, or other LLMs are really useful, particularly if you give them the URL or limit them to the URL scan, search and API documentation. You can build a pretty good customized LLM agent that'll develop a lot of these queries a lot quicker than you can think them up. And again, wildcards and regex are available. If you'd write regex, it needs to be between slashes. You can do a lot just with wildcards, in fairness, but it's handy sometimes to just drop a few regex patterns in there to search for some of the things that we want to look for. Here's just a basic example. So the regex, we've got looking for potentially some impersonating MicrosoftOnline.com websites, and you can see we've just used the dots to allow certain characters to be variable. We talked about sort of finding phishing sites there using that regex. Again, we've got another one here that's containing a pattern, a regex pattern looking for PayPal, or at least the starting point of PayPal, and it's not paypal.com. So it's a good way, obviously, to exclude the main domain so you don't get false positives coming back. And again, you can see we've sort of identified some phishing sites there that are PayPal specific. So we can find malicious C2 panels by, in this case, looking at files that might be on a particular website that are quite unique. In this case, we've identified one called hook.svg. We can see there we've also added in the page server Cloudflare, so not the page server Cloudflare here. That's to remove some of the false positive results. In this instance, this may still be a little noisy in terms of results. So if we have a look at one of those results, it's actually Hookbot Panels for Android malware. In this instance, we've got a good feel that background could be quite unique for that kit. If we just go and have a look from that, so we can see there's a similar infrastructure there, 2,779 other pages that are very similar to this. If we pivot on that in terms of like the structural similarity, which is another method for URL scan to identify similar looking files or information on pages, we can see there's a load of those. If we go back and have a look at pivoting on that file name, so let's check the HTTP section again. We can actually see that we've got the hook SVG file. Could be too generic, that one though. So as I mentioned on the previous search, there might be a better option available for that. If we have a look in the DOM content here for this Hookbot panel, surprisingly, we can see there's actually a title in the H of the page is actually called Hookbot Panel. So it's not always as easy as this, but in this instance, we've got quite a solid identifier there then to build out a rule. So we can run a page title keyword search for that text, and that creates a good rule for us. That there is a favicon icon there as well. By expanding that favicon icon, we can see there's a resource hash. We can use that resource hash then to search, and again using that resource hash for the favicon hash that appeared on the Hookbot page, as we saw, we've also got a good rule there as well, and identified another 2,629 panels. That's the URL scan section over, and next we'll be talking about infrastructure hunting with Shodan. All right, we're into the infrastructure threat hunting with Shodan section, so let's see what we can do here. Let's get my clicker working again. So yeah, starting with using sort of banners and other fingerprints for C2 tracking with Shodan. And Shodan's really like an internet connected search engine, or a search engine, sorry, for internet connected devices. So whilst you could search for certain websites for using sort of HTML content or something like that, you can search for, any kind of thing, any device that's connected to the internet. So it could be routers, could be webcams, like OT or IoT devices, just anything that's got an IP address that is allowing it to be scanned. Can pop up in Shodan, and there's some really interesting searches you can do with the tool for sort of OSINT purposes. I know a lot of offensive teams use it, as a reconnaissance tool, but we're sort of trying to use it in reverse, I guess, is what to identify, adversarial or offensive tooling that might be out there connected to the internet and available for scanning. Shodan's really full of data. We're never going to be able to cover everything today. So again, this is very sort of quick and quite specific to some techniques we use for looking for adversarial infrastructure. But let's get cracking. Let's show a few. So yeah, again, on the filter syntax, so it uses very similar syntax to URL scan. This does not allow regex, unfortunately, but it does allow you to use sort of commas or negation and some other methods to make your query a little bit more broader. But yeah, let's actually get into doing some of these searches. So yeah, in terms of key filters, absolutely HTTP, HTML hashes can be really good, right? Rather than sort of searching for a specific thing in the page, HTML content. This is something where it's got a consistent HTTP, HTML content. You can find other hosts that are presenting the same information. The title, again, we use that in URL scan. You can also do that in Shodan. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of certificate-based hashes and also content that is really, really good for tracking infrastructure. In terms of advanced data access, yeah, there's a raw data tab in Shodan that gives you a hell of a lot of information that you can sift through. And yeah, it's just such a great tool for doing this type of activity. We'll just move to sort of looking at SSL data as well and pivoting with that. So SSL common name, the certificate field, surprising how much malware or sometimes adversaries are putting fairly unique values in these fields that can be tracked. So yeah, you can do that by using sort of SSL.colon to search quite broadly, or there are some more specific fields in there that we'll sort of point you to later in the workshop again that can allow you to search more granularly within the certificate data. And yeah, we've got an example there, which again, sort of operational security fail, I guess, for async rat, where the SSL value for that tool is actually async rat server. So yeah, whilst there is, if you can pay for the premium version of Shodan, they'll already have a product tag that you can use to look for that. If you can't, you can just use that SSL search field to look for async rat servers. Again, it's just an example of how blatant it is there, and yeah, currently 27 of those that are running. Again, looking at SSL data, I guess it's certificates and hashes and the subject and issuer fields. Again, these can sometimes offensive security tools are already putting something in there that's quite unique as a sort of a way to tip off defenders to these tools. Obviously, it's not very difficult for a more OPSEC aware adversary to change these things. But yeah, you'd be surprised that there's a lot of cyber criminals, particularly, that are not really changing default content. And it's paramount we're sort of able to pick up that low-hanging fruit and detect those servers and push it into our detection and prevention tools. And the example for Sliver C2 in this instance is again another SSL issuer value called operators and the subject CN of a multiplier. Again, this is how we'd actually search for it within Shodan. Again, pretty straightforward method for identifying Sliver servers. Where we've got other SSL data, such as hashes, so the JARM value can be used. I'd sort of word of warning that a JARM on its own is probably not a good method to rely on for detection. But certainly the JARM can be really, really good if you combine it with some other data, whether that's additional SSL data or potentially like HTTP header information or something like that. But again, here's one such kind of rule written for Redirectors malware, which has been quite effective. And we can see there, we've returned 64 results off the back of that particular search. And when we're doing sort of infrastructure tracking like this, you wouldn't expect generally to see a huge amount of results coming back. I mean, if we're in the thousands or hundreds, that's definitely something could be a bad rule. Could be that you need to potentially filter out honeypots or some other things that might be returning. It's not like your all scam, where sometimes with the phishing pages or infrastructure, you might see a hell of a lot of infrastructure out there. Similarly, like if you're going after traffic delivery services or TDS or other infrastructure the adversaries are using for redirection, you might find an awful lot of that infrastructure versus, looking for C2 servers themselves. They're probably not going to be as many of those out there. Again, looking at content hashes, so the HTTP content hash can be quite useful. Again, this one can actually be quite good on its own for looking for infrastructure. In this case, we're looking at Adaptive C2, which is a newer offensive security tool that's being picked up by some threat actors, including ransomware actors. And just using that HTTP HTML hash at the moment, we can identify 5 of those out there currently that are online. And again, look, there's another HTTP parameter, or the HTTP title. We can see there that the HTTP.title field can be used to search. And again, malicious, again, another sort of malware variant that is out there. We can find those pages that are related to that with quite a simple query. At this point in time, we've sort of seen 3 of those that are available. And again, continue on sort of HTTP headers. Again, another offensive security tool, Havoc C2, which again has a hard-coded value in the HTTP header, which is designed for defenders to be able to look for it and find it. Again, if we have sort of either lower skilled adversaries or ones that don't really care about OPSEC, then we can identify those servers using that search term. And as we continue, we have favicon hashes. So a favicon hash, again, is the little image you'll see sort of up in the top left-hand corner of the browsers. You've got websites open on tabs and things like that. So we can search for those. In some cases, they can be quite useful. I remember sort of Raccoon Stealer had a very distinct favicon hash with a little raccoon. Not too many of those about, unfortunately, now, because that's one we used to use when we sort of gave these talks. But absolutely, sort of Covenant C2 has quite a distinct favicon hash that can be used. And Covenant C2, again, is another offensive security tool similar to sort of Cobalt Strike or Sliver or Havoc. And in this case, we can see that favicon hash on the screen, and we're able to identify 6 servers out there currently. I think if you sort of were to dig in on those results as well, you can actually see there's maybe some other detects there. So looking at the SSL certificate there, they're using Covenant as a common name on the issuer. So it's, these kinds of things, OPSEC mistakes are ever happening a lot, or are put there by design in open source frameworks, and can really be a good way to actually identify these servers out there on the internet. Another option that we've not really dug into the rules, you can see the server there, sort of Kestrel server that's being used, and that's consistent across them. Again, the sort of content type and the HTTP response code, all very similar. I think you'd sort of really struggle to use that on its own, just because there'd probably be quite a lot of false positives coming back. But again, combining that with certificate values or page titles, again, or or favicon hashes is a good way of actually being able to identify these command and control servers. Looking again into sort of more advanced hash pivoting, so the certificate fingerprint. So again, this is going to be really sort of good for identifying infrastructure. In the example here, we've got sort of smoke loader, where you can identify that via the SSL fingerprint. And yeah, again, this is a sort of query where probably look at the results again to see if we've got anything in there that potentially might need filtering out. But again, it's a nice number. We're in the sort of tens. This is again something that could be a good detection rule to defend against that particular malware variant. Now, just moving into sort of offensive security tools and Cobalt Strike in particular, Shodan tracks Cobalt Strike quite well and already has built-in product identifiers for Cobalt Strike. Depending on whether you've got the ability to use sort of product or different sort of certain tags, which the free version might not allow you, but you can search for it just by the name. And obviously with Cobalt Strike as well, you've got a watermark that is part of that software, then it gets exposed when the server is running. So using watermarks can be quite useful to actually track various versions of Cobalt Strike, and some groups use distinct versions as well, so it would never be a really high confidence attribution artifact, but it's something potentially that could allow you to build a picture about who this might be or what group it might be relating to. And certainly are some groups that use some very distinct Cobalt Strike watermarks, as well as the server configurations, which does allow you to have a degree of confidence that it could be that threat actor. And again, using that watermark, we can see, which I think it's the default watermark or the crack watermark, all the sixes. That one again is for 111 servers out there currently that are online. There is a massive bit of sort of law enforcement policing activity at the moment along with Microsoft and Fortran and some other vendors to kind of get rid of these cracked Cobalt Strike servers off the internet, and they're using, I think it's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or I've probably butchered that, but they're using a piece of legislation against the hosting providers and organizations that are responsible for the sort of data centers hosting those servers, to get them taken down, because that particular piece of legislation carries a really, really massive a massive fine. So yes, they've had some success with that, but as anything, you just see them move to different infrastructure, moving to probably less credible infrastructure. So again, that could be good to defend, as we're actually blocking some of the ASNs, or the providers that they've moved to might be more palatable than if they're on sort of more trusted hosting providers. But nonetheless, it doesn't seem to stop them for long. They seem to just host it elsewhere, and again, we're in that cat and mouse game with the adversary. So that was the Shodan section. There's quite a few little things in there we've showed in terms of techniques and fields and other things to identify command and control servers. Next, I'm going to just show some alternative tools. Quite a short section. So yes, welcome back, and let's get into alternative tools we can use for infrastructure threat hunting. So yeah, there's a whole bunch out there, and I've definitely not got them all on this slide, but certainly some of the ones on here I've used, and can vouch for them being pretty damn good. In terms of similarity, I guess, to Shodan. So you've got Census, which is really kind of good tool. Actually, probably a little bit more flexible in terms of supporting regex on searching, and they've just brought out the infrastructure threat hunting sort of module to it as well. So definitely, Census is another really good tool like Shodan. FOF, DriftNet, Whoami, NetLess, Criminal IP, all of those as well, quite similar to your Shodan and your Census tools. Where you've got some more kind of complete platforms now, where they're actually sort of doing some of the rules themselves and starting to starting to sort of build their own kind of intelligence teams that are producing, again, block lists or detection lists and things like that. Those types of companies are Silent Push, Hunt.io is doing that as well. In terms of kind of global visibility, then you've got Team Cymru, so their NetFlow tools, particularly sort of Scout and Recon, they allow you to do this at like a much bigger scale than what some of these vendors are doing in terms of their data sets. They've got access into what you see actually, externally as well. So where we use these other tools to be able to just look for an IP, understand the sort of information that was, associated with it in terms of what it was running, metadata around that, whether it's certificate data or page data or files or so forth, so on and so forth. Team Cymru can actually allow you then to see the connectivity between that host and other things out there on the internet for the networks that they have access into. So that global NetFlow data is a bit of a game changer for them, and really something, again, that's on top of this, once you've identified command and control infrastructure, being able to see actually where it's connecting to, maybe identifying victims or being able to do an early warning if it connects to any of your infrastructure. It's a really cool tool. It's a really cool capability that you can use. Others like Hunt.io certainly are really, really good, and again are really quite focused on infrastructure hunting, providing rules and feeds again, and categorizing open things like open directories that you can search for to understand, kind of malware might have been hosted on then other files, exploits and things that, again, can give you a more complete picture potentially of what's going on with that command and control server, or again can give you other intelligence leads that can allow you to then go and uncover other infrastructure or perform attribution. Again, Validin's another cracking tool which allows you to sort of search through sort of passive DNS, has a lot of has similar capability, sort of Shodan and Census as well, to be able to search through metadata involved with the kind of headers or certificate information. And again, a real bit of a Swiss Army knife for doing infrastructure hunting and pivoting. And traditionally, VirusTotal will allow you to do that with a sort of premium version of that. It can be quite expensive at times to in terms of search queries to actually do it in VirusTotal, but it does allow you to do an element of it. And it can be a good starting point in terms of just validating your results, as anything being tagged as being malicious, or if you're starting to search for some infrastructure, potentially verifying, what you're seeing is the malware that you think it is, through either looking at the communicating files or other data that's available. And Mmap sometimes is a case of kind of going and doing the scanning yourself, particularly some of these data sets the host is not available or don't have the data. So if, there's various plugins for Nmap that allow you to actually go and scan something yourself and get that information and really sort of confirm or deny what's going on there. A good example was with our team, we'd identified that Darkgate, the port it was running on initially when that kind of became a big thing, was not providing data into Shodan. So we were able to sort of use Nmap and build a kind of custom script ourselves to be able to identify those Darkgate servers. And again, rolling your own tools, absolutely. So where I work, we've built our own custom C2 tracker, I guess. It's again like a front end essentially for a number of other tools like Euroscan, Shodan and others, to be able to track this infrastructure continuously, manage the life cycle of the rules, and feed it into our sort of SOC and MDR teams and customer prevention devices to proactively protect them. But things like Monty Security have published their own C2 tracker on GitHub. Again, this is something you can take for yourself. I believe this one allows you to write both Shodan and Census rules. And you can stand a server up with this running and essentially create your own C2 tracking capability, which is very cool. And I've seen lots of projects like this popping up, and obviously with Gen AI and LLMs at the moment and where they're going to. It's not that long before you can pretty much instruct an LLM to build you a similar capability based on your own requirements. Just finishing out, and it would be rude not to mention some people that are pretty good at infrastructure pivoting, far better than myself for sure. Luckily, I've worked with a few of these and still have a couple on my team, but obviously Josh Penny, person I work with at the moment, is fantastic at infrastructure hunting. Michael Kogwara, where pretty much learned myself and many others how to do this stuff. Chris Duggan, who's very, very good at this, quite prominent on Twitter and things like that as well, and put some absolutely brilliant stuff out there. ProDAF team, quite good as well. Yash, another sort of guy in my team, who's also doing a course here in Edinburgh on Yarrows, another sort of ninja in this area. And Will from Team Cymru, who's also pushing some good stuff out around using Shodan and other tools to do infrastructure hunting. So he's definitely some good Twitter handles, but there's just too many out there to put on a single slide. But there's a couple that are worth following. So let's get into the real world examples that I've been promising you. So first of all, ClickFix, who I'm sure we're all either fed up with or very well familiar with this technique, and subsequently FileFix as well now, which is a variation using a shortcut for Explorer that can run code on Windows machines. But obviously this is a social engineering technique used by both cybercrime and nation-state threat actors, often prompting users to follow some instructions to run some code, generally PowerShell, and again, looking quite convincing as well. Some of these are delivered through sort of fake patches and things like this. The first one we're going to look at, there was a very unique fingerprint in the HTML content of the page. Doesn't look unique when you look at it, but in this instance it did give us an interesting fingerprint to use with URL scan. Using that fingerprint again, we're able to use the text.content field to search for check the box to confirm you're human, and again found a whole bunch of this ClickFix infrastructure being hosted on Cloudflare. It's probably worth saying that Cloudflare, things hosted on Cloudflare, CDNs, quite difficult to identify those and track them using Shodan. So that's where, again, like I said, using a mix of tools really gives you better coverage of everything out there. And URL scan doesn't discriminate. If it's on Cloudflare, we still get the fingerprints from the page content to be able to search for it. But certainly Shodan can struggle sometimes finding things that are hosted on CDN such as Cloudflare. Again, there's another one here for Mamba 2FA, Adversarial in the middle infrastructure. It's a phishing as a service kit. It's popped up. I think there's a number of, as well as ourselves, a number of others who's written reports on this one, like Sequoia have wrote something pretty good on these 2FA phishing kits, I believe. Again, this was something that we came across in our client base shortly sort of after. Apologies. And the lures themselves are really realistic, and again they use the man-in-the-middle proxy. So for you to sort of evil jinx or these kind of token interception toolkits that are out there, it's very realistic. It uses some of the legit infrastructure to actually proxy the multi-factor authentication requests and tokens, and then intercept them, passing them then onto their own login page to allow them to get into your account. So really nasty bit of kit, commoditized now and available on sort of dark web for anyone to buy. On this one, what we noticed in the infrastructure was there was a few JavaScript files actually that were quite rare. We were able to pivot on those then. As you can see, there's a number of them on there, as well as another sort of file name that was quite consistent among all the sites called socket.io.min.js. So you combining the two together and the option of these quite rare JavaScript files, we're able to find a whole host of infrastructure, so a lot more results that were pertaining to the phishing kit other than just the two you can see from looking at one script alone. We talked about Sliver earlier, so we had a look at Sliver, I think, in the Shodan section. Again, some very common SSL values for Sliver, and that is exactly how you write a detect for this particular offensive security tool. So again, you can see the sort of more granular use of the SSL cert subject CN field and the SSL cert issuer .cn field to identify that. And where possible, if you can be granular and use those more specific field names, obviously querying is going to be more efficient and less likely to actually pull back false positives. Metasploit, so quite a good technique for looking at offensive security tools is to actually get on their GitHub repos. And in the case of Metasploit, obviously, there's a very distinct favicon icon that is being used. So again, that we're all familiar with Metasploit and that image, I'm sure, and this is one that we can use to get the hash of that favicon and use that as a search result. You can see there right in front of you as well. I'm pretty sure you can understand another method of being able to identify Metasploit. So we see that we've got the certificate value in there that can be used. So favicons and SSL certificate values for Metasploit for the win. So now we're just going to look at the Russian APT Midnight Blizzard. I'll just give you an APT sort of real world example. Focus here on computer network exploitation, globally, obviously probably quite focused around sort of Ukraine and allies of Ukraine in the past couple of years. And these are definitely known for using Cobalt Strike. And they also use redirection frameworks. So, rather than hosting Cobalt Strike directly on the internet where it can be found, they're using proxies to actually identify whether the beacon that's coming back to it belongs to one of their sort of command and control servers or team servers, and is then passing it on to the team server if it is verified as being one of their beacons. This is, an OPSEC control to try and evade people or trying to track their infrastructure and obviously make it more camouflaged. However, again, there are methods to be able to actually detect this. And in this case, actually the HTTP header that is found on the redirection server itself can be used. Again, this pattern we've got here is also we're also able to negate some fields there. So if we look at the Shodan hunt rule, we're actually removing strict and the value X from the profile. So some false positive results being returned. And again, that really sort of signifies the importance of using those filter syntax in your rules, as well as, what you found to be quite unique. In this case, again, there we identified that this was a Cobalt Strike beacon. Sometimes, it's going to pass it to somewhere else, but, we confirmed it on this host because it was actually hosting Cobalt Strike on the server as well. And you can see there, looking at the host header on this one, quite interesting. They've just done a typo on Microsoft.com. And if we just move quickly into those sort of try looking at watermarks. So again, watermarks on these command and control servers can be quite a useful mechanism for clustering servers or trying to identify unique activity that might be happening over a specific time span. Again, alone, it's not a really solid factor for doing attribution, but again, it can add some additional confidence to your assessments when you're actually tracking infrastructure, and if someone is asking you to do any form of sort of attribution around the infrastructure. And yeah, that was the last one. So finally, just into the last part of the workshop, which is actually going to be getting out there and doing some hunting ourselves. So we've put together a kind of fake scenario here, and really your mission is to go out and hunt infrastructure, score as many points as possible, and the top analyst in the Edinburgh conference will get a challenge coin. And if anyone's UK based, I guess, remote, that does particularly well, I think we can probably get a coin out to you as well. Unfortunately, sort of doing this globally and sending out to people in like America and other places like that, it's going to not be very cost effective for me. But if I ever bump into any of you at a conference or something like that and you've done really well, or you're in the UK, just hit me up and I'll sort you out. So yeah, there is the hunt coin in all of its beauty. And the CTF itself is hosted at infrastructure-hunting.co.uk with a registration code of 9990999. When you get there, you're going to hit the CTFD box. It's going to allow you to register an account. Once you've registered an account, be able to log in and take part in the challenges. So yeah, good luck everyone. It's a bit of a rapid reel off of the slides, but no one really sort of likes death by PowerPoint anyway, right? It's all about kind of getting hands on and seeing how we go. In the Discord, I'll be available to support anyone that's getting stuck or answer any questions. If you're on site, obviously I'm around to come and catch me, and if you need any help with it, I'm more than happy to do that. But otherwise, yeah, good luck, and we'll see how you all get on later.